So President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced plans to resolve the country's energy crisis. The president says Eskom will add new generation capacity to the grid on an urgent basis. Surplus capacity will also be procured from independent power producers to help South Africa's ailing system. A national energy crisis committee has also been established to work towards financial sustainability. Let's get you more reaction on this and speak to energy economist Lungile Mashele. Lungile, always good to have you in Newzroom Afrika. Welcome. So, it's been hailed in part as a step in the right direction. Does this plan by the President and government more broadly go far enough to deal with the horror of load shedding?
Thank you for having me. So, I must be honest and say I have not seen a plan. What he presented last night was more ideas and concepts. But the one thing that will end load shedding that he did emphasize on was that Eskom needs to do their reliability maintenance. However, this is a function of skills, which he did address, that they are looking at additional resources, but it's also a function of money, which is not really addressed adequately as well. But that is the one thing that is going to get us out of stage 6, stage 4, and we can sort of get on with our lives for a reasonable amount of time.
But of course, while it may be a step in the right direction and there may be inputs that some have said, in fact, in criticizing this announcement should have been obvious 15 years ago, the true test will be in whether we can get it done and get it done in the quickest time, will it not?
Absolutely. And I think why I'm a bit skeptical about what has been announced is that there were no time frames given to any of this. There was talk of this fast tracking. We need to procure from bid window 6 and we're going to double that. But there was no talk of how this all relies on transmission. It relies on skilled resources coming into play. It requires funding. There's technical services, engineers. There's a whole lot of things that are required. How are we even going to capacitate NERSA that must do all the licensing, the DMRE that needs to issue all these RFPs, the IPP office, so there's a whole lot of things that have to happen before we can even claim progress, on this side.
And just on that, for example, solar is the main focus to a large degree in terms of what's likely to assist while the issues at Eskom, technical and otherwise, are being addressed. How quickly or how quick can the turnaround be from solar if, for example, we're going to procure surplus energy from a business to get into the grid and sell it to Eskom? So
it's not quick at all. If you look at solar, there are studies, there's resource assessments, there's environmental assessments, water use licensing. There's all that stuff that needs to happen way before you even submit your RFP. Once you submit your RFP, you then have to wait until you're announced preferred bidder, which can take anything up to 3 to 4 months. Once that happens, you need another couple of months before you get to financial close. And what we've seen recently is that financial close can take even up to a year. So you basically had all that work that you had to have done, upfront for a number of years. Financial close is another year. Then for you to get to commercial operation date where those are electrons that are online, that's another 18 to 24 months. So regardless of what was said about how we're going to fast track, have a one-stop shop, and how we are going to consolidate, at the end of the day, there are rudimentary things and statutory requirements that are in place. So the project, you're looking at anything between 36 months and more.
And government was quite passionate about this, shall we say, from the President's address, the lifting of the licensing threshold for embedded energy generation projects. For people like myself and others watching, listening to this conversation, who just want to know if the lights will be on for the remainder of the week, how much of a game changer is that? What does it mean in everyday reality?
So I was one of those people that when the president first announced the 100 megawatt cap last year, I was very excited. And I thought this is a game changer and there's going to be lots of, input from the private sector. But to date, NERSA has only approved about 211 megawatts, of what we thought. So in concept, it's a great idea, but in reality, what it's showing us is that even private sector is saying that this is an expensive route for us to take. And for the most part, many of us cannot afford it. Many projects are actually anything between 10 to 15 megawatts. We've seen some come in at like 20, 30 megawatts. We have not seen any of the big 100 megawatt projects. So extending it is also really just a function of saying, everybody come and let's play. But a 100 megawatt project is anything between 1.2 to 1.5 billion rand. Very few private entities have that kind of a balance sheet.
And this 6,000 megawatt figure that's been put out constantly, and the President said that it unlocked a pipeline of more than 80 confirmed private sector projects, and with a combined capacity, I beg your pardon, of that more than 6,000 megawatts. When you hear that, how realistic is it?
It's not realistic at all. People have expressed interest in terms of what they'd like to do. They still are going to go back to the drawing board, speak to their shareholders, put together their proposals and decide what is feasible. And remember that we are almost on the brink of a recession. There are a lot of things that are happening in this country economically which might prevent some of these private companies from taking that plunge and actually investing in a 20-year project ultimately.
And going forward then, what is the alternative? How can this plan be improved?
So on the one side, you've got the maintenance, the reliability maintenance that has to happen. With that plan, we need to be very clear on where the money is coming from, when the money is coming. We also need NERSA to basically get on with what they have to do and allow Eskom their allowable revenue ultimately. And Eskom can then implement what is necessary to stave off load shedding. Then looking at medium to long term, that is when you get new capacity. And we're basically looking at renewables as well as gas. And gas is very important in this context because it enables us to have more renewables online ultimately. We also are looking at, battery. But again, that is going to be a function of money, but it's also going to be a function of transmission to evacuate like this power also. So with what the President has announced, increasing the bid window 6, ultimately the constraints that exist for all the projects will continue to exist for this, and there's nothing that can be done unless you sort out the transmission issues.
Lungile Mashele, good to speak to you. Thank you so much for being on Daytime Update.